Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast based on writers sitting around drinking coffee and talking about anything and everything. We may use explicit language and will almost certainly drop F-bombs, but none of that is the point or the drive of the content, so consider us PG-13. There will be rants and raves and occasional readings. There will be conflicting creative advice driven by at least 3 utterly disparate points of view. Your hosts today are web spider David Welsh and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 17 with guests Raymond Greer and L. Douglas Skerritt. Do we call you Doug?
You can call me Doug.
Fantastic. We'll call you Ray.
You can call me Ray.
Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for the coffee.
We were lucky enough to catch Doug on his way through. Doug is a friend of Ray's and Ray's wife, Nikki, and me, hopefully, coming in here soon.
Oh, yeah.
At this hour, you could say that.
That's right. Doug is a board game designer and has written a thriller called Remember When that I had the fortune to read when it was in some of the early stages.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course. And Ray also has been involved both in board games and online computer games and the movie industry. So writing in all of these different areas is such a fascinating thing. So let's start with the fun, easy stuff. Let's talk about games real quick.
Oh, my word.
The door we came in through.
Yes. Well, a lot has changed since then. You live in a golden age. I was one of the old heroes from Hero Games days. We made not the first, but probably the best superhero role-playing game. So when
Champions?
Champions.
Oh, 30 Dice of Knockback. We all remember Champions.
You know it. So when people were busy complaining about the land of murder hobos in this fantasy setting, and we wanted to give kids a better idea and role model, we tried something different and backed into a mechanic that became popular that could be used for anything, and so consequently we did that. We had different genres all connected with the same game, which back in those days was a big deal. And oddly enough, my buddy Doug here wrote our spy and secret agent thing called Danger International.
It was fun. I got brought in from the side to do basically the movie version of Spies with all of the ham-fisted cliches that appropriately go with it. And in the midst of that, I got to be involved as they got to other genres, and I ended up at one point writing a pretty lengthy future history treatment for a potential Star Hero game, and a bunch of structural material and adventure settings for their fantasy game. And so I got to reach from my background, which I did know, which was international affairs and the way real law enforcement and espionage works, to the game side of it, and have a lot of fun doing it and put a lot of it on paper. I then walked away from writing for the next 15 years. Never touched it. It was very strange. The gaming era ended with some short fiction, and then I went in a different direction for a while.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I get that. There's a lot of people that don't really come back to writing until they have, and maybe it's thinking about the time, or maybe you're playing less games, so therefore you have more time to write games. Yeah. I don't know.
Right, when you get a chance to look at your life experience and the things you've seen and go, hey, I want to express that. What do I do? Oh, I know, I'll use the things I know, or maybe I'll learn something new, or I'll try something new. Yeah, it all happens.
So were you the technical writer or the creative writer, or both on Champions?
Okay, so George McDonald and Steve Peterson were actually the leads. I did a lot of piecework and ran the business. So basically, I got to do all the awful stuff that they didn't want to do.
Oh my God, tables.
George was the systems guru,
yeah,
and had actually spent the time coming up with the numbers and the role play and the roles behind the role play.
Yes, Steve understood words. So now, I have to say though that those were flint knives and bearskin days. Okay, we were well ahead of the curve, because instead of going and doing production to send things out for a linotype machine at great personal expense, we had figured out how to use a personal computer and an IBM Selectric typewriter with a fresh ribbon, good enough to make boards. Yes, back in those days, you put paper on boards to send to a printer, okay, and get production costs to something that was affordable to the hobbyist at that time who had no money. These days, there is an amazing array of ways to publish never seeing paper at all, with distribution through the web that makes it trivial. Drive-through RPG plug. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Like our friends at Drive-Through RPG.
Ever been in print, it's there for cheap. Go get it. Which means that if you have an idea for a role-playing game, which means it's not the standard genres, or not the standard ways to do it, or not the standard dice, or not the standard groups, or subsets, or slice the apple however thin you want. Now is the time. It's cheap to do.
It really is.
There was one of Dave's favorite games is Fiasco, which, as near as I can tell, is almost entirely PDF based. Or was there ever a hard copy?
I found it in a game shop one time.
Okay.
I have a copy of the print Fiasco, but it is not the standard way to absorb the process.
Dave actually wrote a module for it, which for my birthday he gave it to me. So
at the time, I couldn't find any steampunk story.
Yeah, they didn't have them. But did you do one? That's cool.
did.
Dave did a Steve Punk Fiasco episode.
I would like to see this.
Yeah. Well, now I've seen other ones on the web, but at the time I just couldn't find one.
I'll send you his. I think it's incredibly cool, and maybe we can find a way to post it on the website because I really do think it's cool. And I'm a big believer that people around the world should play Fiasco because it's a very silly game.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is I'm finding over time the interrelationship between people who either gamed as their hobby or came up through gaming into creative writing and concept work. Over time, they've all ended up nested into other groups of recreation or fantasy activities. One of the best groups I've got up in Washington State have a group that came out of a gaming club, focused on role-playing only, and have splintered off respectively into a writing for storytelling only, which eventually then led to novella-length novels, etc. And the side group from that went the other way and are costumers, steampunk recreators, and extremely active in live action.
It's the creativity either way, I think, of saying that I have a character that has a story, and I really want to share that story. I mean, if you listen to earlier episodes, we all went on about how many of us came up through the land of mushing.
Yes.
But before there was a mush, there was, the box set of D&D that mom brings home and says, hey, let's play this weird game. This looks like fun. So I think there, to a certain extent, there's the people that are drawn to the idea of stories, some that want to write and tell them perhaps, and some that want to be a part of them somehow. And maybe that comes down to the writing and readership of the world, but we all want to play a game, or usually I found that gaming overlaps with any other different groups. Like most times, if you find the group of costumers, you also find a group of readers and a group of gamers and a group of, we know our own. History buffs, yes.
Beep, beep.
Beep, beep, beep. That was Ray's phone.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to turn a question back to you because I'm genuinely curious.
What's up?
When you think about wanting to start a story, do you think of a story and look for the character to tell it with? Or do you think of the character and look around and say, what's his story?
Horrifyingly, I have a lot of my stories start with what I dreamed last night.
That's fine.
Okay.
So now, in my dreams, I am apparently both. I have been a girl, I've been a guy, I've been a little pink elephant, so I have no problem.
I must admit, I like the trunk.
Yeah, right? So, or those come out of it in some way. For instance, I have found a certain, I don't even want to say gender fluidity because I don't want to borrow from the wrong group what is not mine to own, but at the same time, I've been a guy, and I've been in a dream. It didn't really matter what gender I was. I was just a force, a person that needed to do this and find out. Like, I have one that was my dark superhero future one that I need to finish 5 other novels so that I can write that one.
Because it's waiting. It wants to come out.
Because it's waiting, and I already wrote, a few thousand words on it. But So it's the same general path, I think, in that you start with scenes, and then scenes become stories. And then stories, you find out that that's not really a short story. There's too much, that it's actually a novel. And I think, like, when I first read yours, I was thinking, there's so much here.
Oh, yeah.
It was too short.
I had this horrific problem of I had exactly a moment to tell, and the perspective that I wanted to get that moment told. I was well aware by the second day of the process that what I was experiencing was this should be part of a much bigger story.
Yeah. Glad you reaffirm your instincts there.
Yeah, but I really wanted to somehow this was a case of the writer desperately needing to get a story out so he could sleep the next day, by the way. Those happen.
Yeah.
But I had to get the moment out. And it's actually not just, only 50 pages of a novella-length story. It's like the last 10 pages of the 50 length. It's what had to come out.
So getting back to your question, why do you ask?
What drives this question?
Yeah, thank you. Which is a great joke, by the way.
Yes.
No, the reason I was asking is because when I bounce some of my ideas off of people in my sort of extended circle, I get a wide variety of answers, and gaming in particular seems to force two extremes to the answer. The guys who came up game mastering want to tell a story setting because they're used to their players bringing the characters to it. The people who came up as players have my story to tell. What's the setting?
That makes sense. But, in a more general sense, I've heard over and over again, there is no one right way to do it, TM.
That is true. There's my favorite book, I think I pimped early, and I mentioned it before, is how to write a mystery novel book. And what I loved about it was every single chapter opens with a question. How do you write a novel? And then somebody went out and polled 20 different novelists, some very famous people, and got 20 different answers. And even in previous episodes, Chaz writes one way, I write one way. And sometimes they're different, and sometimes I use more than one method. Like I'm starting a sequel right now because I've just finished a historic fantasy noir. And this time I'm doing an outline, and I've never done an outline before in that way.
Formalizing it.
So I'm just formalizing it, saying this is what I have scenes in my head that have to happen.
Yeah.
And then saying I went out to Pittsburgh and I did research in the area and for the time of what was going on. And wow, what a bloody history we have in America. We are not a nice people. But it was going back and reading it and going to a museum and visiting and seeing the sites. It was like, okay, in order to get all of this out there, and there's a lot of it, I need to kind of inch it out, because as much as I dive into the history has to support the drive of the story.
Yeah.
So
do you want me to give you the patented role-playing how to do a mystery thing?
Yes.
Short? Because when I used to go to conventions all across the country, you would get a short block of time, a bunch of people that didn't know your game, and you'd hand them some pre-generated characters, and you were going to teach them the game, but you wanted to make them interested. And when you didn't have anything else, the locked room mystery in 3 hours was the thing to do.
Locked room mysteries.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that if you would.
Sure. You would have a group of players, whatever they are. It doesn't really matter. You would have a location, probably where you're sitting, that you would then interpret in some way that the people involved in this mystery couldn't call out, bring in other people, bring in other resources. You would then look about the room and see 3 obvious features and build clues about them. Because you are presenting these to them, they must be important. This is assumed.
Right.
Okay.
I know a side quest when I see one. That's a cat sitting there in a pool of light.
That'd be the one. And you would then answer for the first hour anything these people had to think of, pointing out that they are on a timeline, something bad will happen if they do not solve this between them. You then listen to them debate, because they will. They're players. Gamers do that.
Oh, God, yes.
And fixate upon the clue you least intended them to do.
Correct.
But
About the time they've pretty much got it wrapped up, you then disprove one of the clues as a red herring and add a fourth.
Okay.
Then increase the timeline. They now panic. There will be a tremendous amount of flurry because their great answer is down, and come up with something. When they come up with this, you congratulate them on their inventiveness because they have solved the mystery, whatever that happens to be, because it's not important. You're attempting to sell games. They think they have been victorious. They think you're devious and great, the best ref ever, and they've had the best time because they've all gotten to interact and learn the game and roll dice and have a wonderful time and leave and buy your game. Now, the catch here is it only works if they don't know the trick. Okay? If they don't really understand.
Oh my God, should we publish this?
yes, we can put this on the air now.
Let's be clear. You're talking about making it up on the fly.
That's absolutely right. I came up and my bag with all of my stuff didn't. Yes.
I ran some of these games for Hero back in the day, and it's still a thing that I enjoy the idea of a lot.
Is Hero fantasy, Hero, or Champions?
All of it.
I did the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
I was weakest on Champions. I ran very little Champions. I ran a whole metric fuck ton of Fantasy Hero, Danger International, and Justice Incorporated, which was their pulp hero
I remember
game.
Justice
And Pulp was my personal pride and joy because my convention prepared characters were a classic Doc Savage level team of guys.
Dirk Malcolm and the Society of Justice.
You guys have done this before.
Yeah.
Does it show?
But the locked room mystery, stealing from all of the tropes of everything Agatha Christie did on a weekend to make money, with exactly what he mentioned. The third clue you disprove and the fourth one you drop on them late. With the gamer spin of, and when they have a plausible solution, I then accept it as the answer and reward them for it. Is such a good role-playing technique. Is it good to feed into something you're going to write down?
Probably not.
You have to be the one who jumps to the conclusion.
Yep.
So he's actually proposing the idea of I start writing my mystery not knowing what the answer is.
I don't know.
Would you do that?
I would.
I would. However, I would, but isn't that what they say? There is a very important chapter in that same thing of saying the most important thing, if you're going to have a mystery, is that you, the author, must know what Moriarty is doing. So you might not know the answer. You might not know the clues that the characters can surprise you, but you need to know what Moriarty did and in what order so that the clues make sense, because there have been a number of, I'll just call them crappy books I didn't finish, where something was not internally consistent within the book. Yeah. Well, so even if you have things that can come out in different order, like we all saw the bank explode.
Right.
Now, we know that was the opening chapter of the book, that the bank exploded, and there was a whole, Moriarty did not just get up, have his coffee, and go down and blow a bank up. You know, that there was more to that, and you need to know what that is. However, all of the different clues that can come out of later, you can surprise yourself because your character can surprise you.
Getting back to there's more than one way to do it, Tim. I think that as long as you know all that stuff in the end, you're okay. My creative writing process, on the rare occasions when I'm allowed to be creative, is to just start putting words down on paper. And if I don't know, I would be perfectly comfortable writing a mystery novel not knowing at the end what was going to happen. It would come out.
Do you ever wonder if the people who wrote the script for the movie Clue
did they actually know that it was Professor Plum with a candlestick?
There was a thread on Facebook recently about the new Clue movie, quote unquote, and somebody was saying, well, they should make, there are six weapons, 6 characters, there could be any number of things. And I said, yeah, there's 9 rooms, so there's 324 potential movies. Get busy.
Yeah, exactly. That was on Lee Presson's post, I think, and I was the one who suggested they make, said film one of each ending because Clue had 3 endings.
Absolutely.
And then it's only when you watch it now you can rent it and it says, yep, here's ending 1. Or it could have been like this. Yeah. But how it really was like this.
So yeah, I did the math. They were slacking. They could have
expanded the franchise, you're saying.
Exactly. Yep.
The only challenge is they said things like, you were not present during this scene and you were not present. And it actually made me want to back it up and say, were they? Did they actually do that right? Or did they just sort of, because I'm a pedant.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Your job as continuity editor.
My job as continuity editor. Well, that's the last thing you want in anything. Like if you were writing, I invited Dave to read books that I kind of liked, and he threw it down and said, I hate it. This author doesn't know about guns. I have guns, it's wrong. So it lost everything. The whole story arc, the idea, the world setting, everything died because he got guns wrong.
My immersion has been crushed.
Yes.
It's not necessarily just guns. It's whatever you happen to know about.
Yeah.
It's true. I do IT security, and it's really hard to watch the movie Sneakers.
Oh, my goodness. That probably is the...
My other favorite one, keep them talking so we can trace the call to find out where this 911 call is coming from, which is the dumbest thing ever. And I'm convinced that the police put it out there saying, now, whatever you do, make sure that people think it takes 2 minutes to trace a call.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, just for everybody's knowledge up there, if you go and you pick up your phone and you dial 911, they know where you are. It's harder on the cell phone, but I'm noticing different states have opened up 911 because they have better triangulation. But if you have a wired line and you dialed 911, and especially if you hang right up again, they will show up.
Yes, they will.
I know because reasons.
So you've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard.
Asking for a friend.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's where that comes from. So where do you, you've finished yours. Did you make all the way to a novel, or is it still novella length? Or
I just did a year's project to decide to tell the next step of the story in novel format. And first of all, I got to educate myself on exactly how much work a full novel is.
It's a lot.
It really is. And the base writing process for me was slightly under 6 months. And I want to put this in comparison. 15,000 words for a novella was 40 working hours of composition and roughly twice that in editing.
Yeah.
80,000 words of novel is coming up on 13 months, including editing right now.
So you're saying it's not linear.
We are not Rachel Aaron or Shannon McGuire. We do not pump them out in the speed of... Yeah. But on the other hand, it gets easier with practice. Your first one takes longer.
Well, that's true, too.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I'm familiar how long it takes because my charming wife is doing editing for this guy. So their Skype calls to Japan happen a lot.
Yes.
Ray has actually gotten to sit in on the back and forth of us surrounding and cornering bad paragraphs and beating them into submission.
Mm.
And oddly enough, this is where some of this comes back around to role-playing, because we were talking about a description of a fight scene that he's doing. And oddly enough, it sounded very much like a game description.
Yeah, I can actually field this one as a quick answer because I had a discussion with one of my Washington colleagues who is classically trained as a fiction writer. So he got you must outline everything first and you must compose in this format. You must write all chapters are best written from a single point of view. Mm-hmm. He's since grown past that, but it was his original education.
And I will argue that it is a fine rule of thumb anyway, because I got yelled at for this years ago early on when I was writing, and Kit Carr in my writing group was the one who said, she paused and she looked at me and she said, when you were writing this, did you see it like it was a movie in your head? And I'm like, oh, yes, absolutely. She's like, yeah. You wrote it from a movie point of view, which isn't working as a novel point of view. Mm-hmm. So if you want to write a movie script, that's different because then you can pan to this character and have him the voice in his head. And then you can pan to this character and have the voice in their heads. But The problem is pronoun trouble, as Daffy Duck says. He doesn't think so. Wait, which he? We've now gotten
Anchoring the he. Yes.
super hard to pull off, and I've seen where it works, but it is not very often. So
it's
that was
very hard to approach it any different way. The single point of view chapter is if you were to tell someone a way that they will most likely get it right the first time, that's what you should tell them.
Right.
There's a reason they teach it in school that way.
And I throw it around as the question. She's like, why do I need to know what that character is thinking for the first and perhaps only time in this book? Mm-hmm. And I had to stop and stare at her for a minute and say, what an excellent question that is. Mm-hmm. And why do you need to know? It's like, oh, okay.
But I'm going to turn the other side of that coin and say, watching my colleague's work where he had 3 significant protagonist type characters in different parts of a very extended scene. He ended up writing 3 point of view chapters, each of them from their individuals, with so grievous an overlap of time between them that before you were into the second chapter, you knew what the third chapter's point of view would reveal. And so it felt like you were reading the same thing over and over again.
Yep.
And he felt hurt by this and was looking for other ways to approach it. I then showed him what I did for an extended fight scene at the end of what will be Remember Them, the new book coming out, which has a 26-page fight scene. And I said, I told this story entirely in linear time.
Yeah, well, you understand, I'm a girl who loves hover tanks, so big long fight tanks and heavy artillery are my thing.
Oh,
so
You're going to enjoy this one.
I have a couple of moments that you will like.
Yeah, excellent.
But I told it in perfectly linear time. I think there are, in the entirety of that part of the novel, there are 3 overlapping paragraphs of less than 5 minutes of time. Everything else is told in linear time, which means I have to change perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking pained.
I'm just wondering how long in real time this scene actually takes.
Beginning to end, from the parts being described in a minute or so's activity to the stuff being described in seconds of activity, it's about 40 minutes beginning to end.
That's a long fight.
It really is. There's a lot of sneaking around leading into it. There are a lot of moments of perception, and then there is 7.5 minutes of trying not to be dead.
Yeah. I was going to say in those, I will sit back on judgment and say, we'll have to read it. But then there's also have a bunch of different people read it. As we always say, read it out loud and listen to somebody else reading it out loud. Mm-hmm. Because that was another one of the very useful things my friend said is have somebody else read it out loud to you or read it out loud to somebody. And not only will you find yourself suddenly saying, oh, I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to... Reading out loud is probably the most useful continuity, scene, cleanness you can do for yourself.
Just having somebody else look at it is like 70-80% of that, right?
Well, yeah. I would say there's 3 pieces of it. One isn't you, but there was a lovely gentleman up in Oregon that my mother knew, and she's like, will you look at my friend's story? I'm like, okay, because this is your friend. And I had to send it back and say, this isn't really readable. I need you to run it through by Grammarly, put it through Grammarly, because I can
English
see
first.
there is a story trying to come out here, but your own use of words is getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote back things saying, oh my God, this is changing my life. Yeah. So I got to recommend, Grammarly out there for everybody. I mean, if you can't trust just the basics of like Microsoft Word, which also has, in grammar, I always say 1 set of words per paragraph. If I'm saying something in 1 paragraph and you're going to say something, that needs to be a new line. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you confuse the hell out of your readers.
I mean, there's a lengthy section that says that lines of dialogue should always be set off. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I follow that, but I understand why people say that in format.
Because it's what everybody does.
Yeah.
Hey,
and when
you... This stuff used to be taught in school.
It did. I'm going to believe that it still is, but people kind of sleep through 8th grade English or something.
Yeah.
Or I don't know what they're teaching. Maybe it's the New English.
It's the same people teaching cursive. It's okay.
I don't know.
But I did find it interesting looking back at trying to do linear timeline and realizing that it required a number of other things to be added to it that were not part of normal storytelling. And almost all of them involved, well, what evolved in our case were pointers. You would be telling a thing. In this paragraph, this person does this action. In the next paragraph, the next person does this action. If they're in the same place, there's no need for a pointer.
Right.
Yeah.
But as soon as somebody is in a slightly different physical location affecting the larger situation, you have to put in a one-liner of some sort to direct the reader to, you're no longer in the courtyard. Up on that rooftop looking to the west is the other member of the team doing this.
Right.
There
Right.
has to be something to point your attention.
Well, the reader can't read your mind. The reader
Exactly.
cannot see until you put it out
You
there.
can
So
only read your
expanding
words,
on the
not your
ancient
mind.
rule, don't edit your own work.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, we're going to put links to all of these stories and the games that we mentioned so that I can pimp out these wonderful gentlemen's work here. All of these interesting things will be on the website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We answer email and notes, so if any of you listening to this reach out and want to ask more questions or didn't have enough link in there or you missed something, please feel free to reach out and ask questions. We live to answer email. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the host. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsor is Jackal Designs, enabling you all to buy cool WDC swag.